Hello everyone, welcome to the second spotlight in April 2026, and as always, time is flying. I hope you guys are watching the news. I keep saying that, but the news is changing every day. Major things happens, and you see all types of cycling going on with regard to whether there's a ceasefire in the war in the Middle East or whether there's continuation. And we told you the only thing you really need to look at is our remote viewing sessions, all available and neatly organized on FARSIGHT'S.com. And, so when they announce a ceasefire, you know what's coming because of all of our shows, especially within the deep news stuff where we cover a lot of the Middle Eastern stuff. So this is just the beginning of the wilderness, when the entire house of cards, the entire planet turns upside down. So you can expect lots more over the next week, in the next 2 weeks, next 3 weeks, and into the summer. Hold on to your hats. And so we're talking about a new topic today. So let me actually start with that. But let me also say within a few days, it's completely ready. We're just waiting to sort of put it up at the right time. Is a new project, a new Great Mysteries project. This one, Aziz fully edited and put together. That's amazing. And let me show you the image for it right now. That's what I was putting up as I was getting ready for the spotlight. So let me actually show you what the image looks like. This is the X-37B space plane. So the X-37B space plane is hugely secret. And that space plane has shown a couple pictures from its ports. It's an automated plane, but it has shown a couple of pictures from its ports where it was like near the moon, and it was showing the pictures of the Earth. I mean, it was like far away. And they've been flying that thing for quite a while. So the real question is, what's in that thing and what is going on with that thing? What are they doing with that thing? That thing's been buzzing around the entire Earth, all going out to near the moon and back for a long time, and just buzzing around like a race car. And the real question is, what was it doing? So that's what we're going to show you. It's the secret of secrets. Okay, so anyway, that's coming out in just a few days, and it'll be available on FarsightPrime.com, as with all of our Great Mysteries projects. Really, you need to know what the secrets are all about. You just can't say it's you're okay with not knowing secrets. What? You have to know what the secrets are. That's the whole thing. All right, so let's actually start with the topic of today, which is nothing is free in life. Nothing in life is free. And folks, you've heard other people talk about the idea of nothing in life is free, but we're connecting this to disclosure and everything else. And it's really important, and it's something that you haven't heard of, an angle of it that's completely new, I think to most people. Friends, I'm going to start this spotlight by giving you a spoiler alert. A spoiler alert! That's right. I, Courtney Brown, I'm going to tell you what I will tell you at the end of this talk. I'm going to tell you now what I'm going to tell you at the end of the talk. And when we get there, it will make sense. It'll make total sense. We all have personal relationships in life. Romantic relationships, lovers, people we adore. The trouble is, relationships tend to run into trouble. Everyone has experienced relationships that do not work out for some reason. Well, at the end of this spotlight talk, I am going to tell you how to control your relationships so that things work out much better. That's right. I am going to tell you the perfect secret to control your lover. That's right. To control your lover. And it perfectly ties into everything else I am talking about today. The fate of planet Earth and all of humanity. That's a spoiler alert. So wait till the end and you will hear it. But first, let me start with something very simple. At some point in your life, you have tried to help someone. You saw that they were struggling and you had the resources. You had the ability to step in and fix the situation, and you did. You helped them. We've all had situations like that. And for a moment, it looked like everything was going to be fine. But then something happened. Nothing changed. The same behavior came back. The same problems returned. And you found yourself asking a very uncomfortable question. Did my help actually help? Or did it make things worse? Well, that question matters more than you think, because it doesn't just apply to individuals, it applies to families, it applies to governments, and it applies to civilizations. Now, as director of Farsight, I hear a lot of complaints. A lot of complaints. People ask why the so-called good ETs don't simply intervene and remove the bad ETs, stabilize the planet, and fix the situation. And when they don't do that, people assume the worst. That the good ETs must have an ulterior motive, that they are secretly the bad ones, that everything is manipulation, and the frustration builds. But here is the problem. The world is entering what we have been calling the wilderness. Conflicts are escalating. You are watching the news, right? Interests are colliding, and there are no clean solutions left. This is not a situation that could be stabilized. This is a situation that has to be worked through. And that leads to the central question. What happens if help removes the very pressure needed for change? Well, the other day I was reading a great science fiction short story by Ray Bradbury. He's one of the classic science fiction writers. Now, There Will Come Soft Rains. That was the name of the short story. And it takes place in the year 2026, and the world is already over. Everything is gone. The city is rubble. There are no people. Now, the world has been destroyed by nuclear war. And it's interesting that the story takes place in 2026, but it was written a long time ago. So that's one of the reasons I had to talk about the story today, because we're right in the beginning of the wilderness, and it's 2026. So there's been a nuclear war in the story, but one thing remains. One thing remains. A fully automated house continues to function. A house without humans. The house goes through its daily routine. It wakes up its non-existent inhabitants. It's got little robots running around. It cooks breakfast for people who are no longer there. It announces schedules, birthdays, and reminders. And it cleans itself with perfect efficiency using robotic systems. But no one responds. The house continues as if nothing has happened. But outside the house, we see what really happened. The city was radioactive. Everything has been destroyed. And on one wall, there are silhouettes of a family burned into the surface, frozen in the moment of nuclear explosion. This is the only trace of human life. But there is the illusion of normalcy. Inside the house, meals are being prepared. Music plays. A nursery creates artificial environments. And a voice reads poetry. But all of this is meaningless. The system continues, but the purpose is gone. And then something living appears. A dog. A starving dog enters the house. It is sick and dying. And it runs through the house in confusion. And it dies shortly after. And the house removes the body automatically. Even life itself is treated as waste. And then we have the poem. The house reads a poem. Nature will continue after humanity is gone. The world will not care that humans disappeared. And the message that the world the message is the world does not need us. So then there is the final destruction. Eventually a tree falls and a fire starts, and the house tries to save itself, and its systems activate. The sprinklers turn on, chemical extinguishers turn on, the robotic responses, but it fails. The house burns down. When the short story ends, only one wall remains, and the wall has a message on it that repeats. It repeats the date over and over. Today is August 5, 2026. If that isn't creepy, I don't know what is. We're right in the middle of starting the wilderness, and August is just a few months away, and Ray Bradbury was writing about it. The wall says, today is August 5, 2026. That's the only thing left, the wall. Okay. So what I find so powerful about this short story is that we live in a society where technology exists independent of humanity. In the story, the house is efficient, intelligent, and fully functional, but it has no purpose without people. Now here is the important question. What actually went wrong? Was it the technology? No. The house worked perfectly. The problem was not failure of the system. The problem was that the system existed without change. Humanity created systems that could continue indefinitely, but humanity itself never changed the behaviors that led to its destruction, and that is the point. So what Bradbury is really telling us is that you cannot fix the outcome of a system if the behavior that drives the system does not change. And that brings us back to the original question. Does helping actually help? Connecting this to what we have today, we see AI systems, automation everywhere, smart homes, and algorithmic decision-making. Our society has used machines to automate the pulse of humanity. It has led to bureaucratic systems that follow rules, but they have no underlying purpose. Automated processes that are valued only because they are automatic and require little to no human thinking. And institutions continuing without purpose. But what you see more deeply in this story is that when humanity offloads its thinking to following rules and employing automated processes, it loses its ability to make its own choices. When humanity loses its own ability to think through its own problems and come to a reasonable solution in an ever-changing environment, its own survival is at risk. And when crises come that threaten its survival, the crises turn into calamities, leaving only the rules that bound humanity to its failed ending. And the way I look at that short story is to find Ray Bradbury's real message to be that it is impossible to fix the problems of anyone if they remain in a state where their past behaviors repeat continually. If any group or person or all of humanity does not have the ability to fundamentally change their behaviors that have contributed to the crises that they find themselves in, then they will perish. The crises must lead to change in the way people think and act. Real change, or their past will destroy them. Well, it turns out that psychologists already understand this. They have studied it for decades, and they all point to the same conclusion. If you remove the consequences of behavior, the behavior does not change. Psychologists often refer to this as enabling rescuing, and it is studied extensively within addiction, family systems, and behavioral psychology. So, let's talk first about the major thinkers that talk about this. We start with the drama triangle. Okay. Now, Stephen Karpman, working with Eric Berne's framework of transactional analysis, developed what is known as the drama triangle. There are three roles. There's the role of the victim, and the role of the persecutor, and the role of the rescuer. I have been in the role of the rescuer a lot, so I know that one. Now, the rescuer looks like the hero. They step in, they fix the crisis, they stabilize the situation. But here's the problem. By rescuing the victim, the rescuer removes the consequences of the victim's behavior. And when that happens, the victim does not develop competence. The victim does not change. And the cycle repeats over and over. Well, the second thing we're going to be talking about is family systems theory. Now, Murray Bowen approached the same issue from a different angle. Family systems theory. He studied how families maintained what he called homeostasis, a kind of equilibrium, even when that equilibrium is unhealthy. Now, in these systems, one person behaves pathologically while others compensate, and they step in, they absorb the stress, they stabilize the system. But the result is the person who needs to change never has to change because the system protects them from collapse. And without collapse, there is no transformation. So let's go to the third one we're going to be talking about, which is motivational interviewing. Now, William Miller and Stephen Rolnick approached this from the perspective of individual change. They focused on something called ambivalence. People do not change simply because they should. They do not change simply because they should change. They change when they feel a deep internal tension, a discrepancy between who they are and who they want to be. And that tension is what drives change. But here's the key. If someone else fixes the external consequences of their behavior, the tension disappears. And if the tension disappears, the motivation to change disappears with it. Okay, now let's go on to the fourth one, behavioral psychology. And that deals with B.F. Skinner, the famous B.F. Skinner. From a strict behavioral standpoint, this becomes even clearer. Behavior is shaped by reinforcement. If behavior leads to a negative outcome, then that outcome acts as a punisher. But if someone removes that negative outcome, if they step in and fix the crisis, then what happens? Well, they are reinforcing the behavior. The individual learns, I can continue this behavior and I will not suffer the full consequences. And mathematically, that increases the likelihood that the behavior continues. Whoa. So let's do the fifth and final one I'm going to talk about, which is developmental psychology. So finally, we have Heinz Kohut, K-O-H-U-T, Kohut, and the idea of optimal frustration. Now, growth does not occur in comfort. Growth occurs when a person encounters a level of difficulty that they cannot solve with their current abilities. That pressure forces development. But if someone removes that pressure entirely, they prevent the development from ever happening. They don't help. They stunt growth. Friends, let's step back and look at this, all of this, together, putting it all together. Different fields, different methods, different language, but the same conclusion. If you remove the pressure that forces change, you prevent change. And that brings us back to the central issue. If the good ETs, which we have talked about extensively in a huge number of videos that we have done on FarsightPrime.com, if the good ETs step in and remove the crises, if they stabilize the system, if they rescue humanity from the consequences of its own behavior, then what happens? Nothing changes. And this isn't just theory. We've seen this pattern before in real history, involving, for example, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and America's entrance into World War II. Now, this is a true story. You're going to be sort of shocked by this, but it is a true story that was best told by Turner Catledge, the former managing editor, executive editor, and vice president of the New York Times. And you can hear this for yourself in 2 videos that can still be found on YouTube. They are Roosevelt Part 1, Hail to the Chief, and Roosevelt Part 2, Manipulator-in-Chief, both narrated by, no less, Henry Fonda. Well, FDR met with Winston Churchill on a battleship in the North Atlantic in the early parts of World War II. Britain was being smashed, and Churchill begged Roosevelt to enter the war. But America was a divided nation at that time, with many local vocal leaders, senators, even Joe Kennedy, the father of Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, vocal leaders strongly arguing for, and Joe Kennedy used to be the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Britain, no less, strongly arguing for an isolationist approach to world events. Joe Kennedy didn't like Britain, even though he was the U.S. ambassador to Britain. And Roosevelt did not want to enter World War II with a divided nation, the way Woodrow Wilson entered World War I. That's what happened with World War I. Woodrow Wilson entered World War I, and he was fighting battles at home, political battles, as well as the military battles in Europe. So Roosevelt didn't want to do that. Roosevelt told Churchill that there would be an incident in the Pacific that would silence all of the opposition to America entering the war. And he had to wait for that incident to occur. I'm not kidding. That is what Turner Catledge said, and you can listen to it for yourself. Some other leaders were told the same thing, such as the Prime Minister of Australia. Meanwhile, Roosevelt transformed the American economy from a peacetime economy to a wartime economy, where tanks and guns were manufactured instead of cars and cutlery. And then came Pearl Harbor. Okay, there is no publicly available proof that Roosevelt had any specific advanced knowledge of the attack on Pearl Harbor. But there were a few strange oddities. On the day of the attack, all but 2 of the entire Pacific Fleet ships were positioned inside the harbor, making them highly vulnerable. When you're attacked, the last thing you want to be, if you're a ship, is inside the harbor. You want to be out in the open sea. And their guns and ammunition were taken offline for servicing. So the boats were sitting ducks, totally defenseless. The 2 ships that were not there were the most advanced ships in the Pacific Fleet. And they were used over the next few months playing what you might call a cat and mouse game with the Japanese Navy, being sighted briefly and then retreating and quickly moving fast to a different location, only to be sighted again, and the cycle continued as they allowed themselves to be sighted and then move someplace else and sighted again, and so on. And this confused the Japanese Navy that had thought it destroyed the entire fleet, but then thought that there were a bunch of ships still functioning and untouched by the Pearl Harbor attack. Now, since the U.S. economy had already been converted to a wartime economy, creating replacement ships for the Pacific Fleet took only a few months. But when the Pearl Harbor attack happened, the nation immediately arose, and there was no more talk about remaining isolationist. And that is what Roosevelt needed. Okay, so the point here is that Pearl Harbor was a crisis. And FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, knew how to leverage a crisis to achieve a higher goal. Now, the goal was to lead a unified nation into World War II. Now, had it not been for the crisis of Pearl Harbor and the direct guidance that FDR gave to the nation to address that crisis, World War II could have ended much differently. The crisis was the power that enabled the pivot. And the guidance of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, only gave that power a direction. Now, I assume that everyone, or nearly everyone, has experienced similar situations, probably more than once. You help someone thinking that this will really push them over the barrier, just to find out that they got all tangled up in the same behavior of the past. The past repeated, the resources you gave to the person did not do the trick. Why would all of humanity be any different? And why should scale matter? So the key is that you don't give any resources to anyone unless you see them change the way you want them to change. And that's what Franklin Roosevelt did. There was a crisis, and he leveraged that crisis to get the nation to change. It was a crisis that brought the nation to its knees, and then you give it direction. Okay? But you had to see the change. And when Pearl Harbor happened, you could see the change. The whole nation changed. So, the key is, again, that you don't give anyone resources. Nobody, unless you see them change the way you want them to change. It's you who are giving them the resources. So you don't give them the resources until the change happens. So you're not trying to control them like a slave. Roosevelt was not trying to control, like a slave, the entire country. Rather, you're simply not giving them your hard-earned resources if you do not see evidence that they are truly different. So on the individual level, it's exactly the same. You don't give people your hard-earned resources unless you see them that they're actually making a change. And that means that you need to be ready to walk away. For real. You cannot bluff with this. If you point a gun at someone's head and threaten them, then you're trying to force them. But if you simply say that you are not going to give them your resources unless they really change, that's totally different. Rather, we are talking about giving away your resources. Those are your resources, not the other person's resources, and you're simply deciding on how to use your resources. But the interesting thing is that if the person is truly capable of changing, then they will change. Your resources are not forcing the change or even causing the change. The person is changing all by themselves. Your resources are simply helping someone who has already changed. And the key is knowing when a person is in a state to truly change. To truly change their behaviors. And that is the tricky part, because people with behavioral pathologies can be very clever and emotionally manipulative when it comes to pulling resources from others. They know how to pull your strings, so to speak. So now, take everything we just discussed and apply it at scale. The Goody Teas understand this dynamic. They are making a strategic decision, and they are sticking to it. Because from their perspective, the question is not, it's not, can we help humanity? Of course they can help humanity. The real question is, will that help actually work? So based on everything we know from psychology, systems theory, and behavioral science, and all of the science that studies this type of thing, the answer is clear. If you remove the pressure, you remove the change. So now imagine the situation from their side. Humanity is in crisis, okay? We can see that it is. Environmental collapse, military conflict, political instability, social fragmentation. And the natural human response is, help us, fix this, stabilize the system. But what happens if they do that? What happens if they reduce the pressure? Nothing changes. The same trajectory continues, and from their perspective, this is not just ineffective, it is dangerous, because their resources are not infinite. Helping humanity is not a symbolic act. It involves ships, personnel, risk, and loss. So they face a hard constraint. They cannot afford to spend resources on a system that will not change. And that leads to a rule, a very simple rule. You do not help until change has already begun. Not promised change, not intended change, not emotional declarations of change. Real change. Observable change. Sustained change. Because the purpose of the help is not to cause the transformation. The purpose of the help is to support a transformation that is already happening. And that is the key distinction. And this is where people get confused. They think, if the good ETs helped, then humanity would change. But the model says the opposite. Humanity must change first, or the help will fail. Okay, now let's consider what the good ETs actually are asking for. They're not asking for control. They're not asking for submission. And they're not asking for obedience. What they are looking for is a signal, a clear collective signal that humanity is ready. And that signal has a very specific form. Open acknowledgement that the extraterrestrials exist, a willingness to engage with that reality, and a clear alignment towards cooperation. In other words, disclosure is not the end of the process. It is the proof that the process has begun. It is the evidence that humanity is no longer denying reality, outsourcing responsibility, or repeating the same patterns blindly. And without that proof, there is no intervention. Not because they don't care. They obviously care or they wouldn't be here. But because helping too early would lock the system into failure. Let's ask what happens when a system tries to preserve itself without real change. Get this. A good way to see this is through a recent science fiction series. As you know, I really like science fiction. Now, this series I watched on Hulu, and it's called Paradise. The first 2 seasons have been released. Now, the premise is simple but powerful. I really recommend you all watch it. It's really a lot of fun. There is a sudden global environmental catastrophe, and it happens fast. There is no time to fix it. So what do the elites do? They execute a plan. They move a carefully selected population into a massive underground bunker, a city-sized structure underneath, hidden inside a mountain in Colorado. The surface collapses, the surface of the planet Earth, and millions, possibly billions, are affected. But underground, the system continues. The bunker works. The infrastructure holds. Life goes on completely as normal. And this is where the story becomes interesting. In season 1, survival and control are the key. So in the first season, we see how the bunker operates. The resources are controlled, access is restricted, information is managed, and it's not just about survival, it's about control of the surviving population. And inside the bunker, something familiar emerges. Political intrigue, power struggles, manipulation. The external catastrophe is gone, but the internal structure has not changed. And then we get to season 2. And again, this is on Hulu. Paradise, a great science fiction series. In season 2, collapse of the controlled system happens. What remains of the outside world finds the bunker. People show up at the bunker from outside. And there is confrontation. there's conflict, and there is a breakdown, and eventually the bunker is destroyed. All of that effort, all of that planning, all of that control, gone. And then the story takes an interesting turn. I am now looking forward to season 3, which apparently they have started to film. By the end of season 2, new elements emerge. Artificial intelligence, AI, even the suggestion of time manipulation. The system tries to evolve, to adapt, to find a new way forward, but the core question remains the same. What was the priority of the elites? Not saving everyone, not transforming humanity. The priority of the elites was to maintain control over a smaller, manageable population. And that is the critical insight, because it tells you something very important about systems under pressure. When collapse comes, systems do not automatically reform. They contract. They simplify. They try to preserve control, even if that means reducing the population, limiting access, restricting information. Phew. So now step back and look at our world. We are facing environmental stress, geopolitical instability, institutional breakdown, and the question is, what are our systems optimizing for? Are they optimizing for transformation, adaptation, collective survival? Or are they optimizing for control under constraint? Now, at the beginning of this talk, I gave you the spoiler alert. I promised that I would give you the perfect way to control your relationships, and indeed, to control your lover. And now is the moment when I will fulfill this promise. I promise this will connect with the general topic of the spotlight talk once I explain the example. Now, since I am a heterosexual man, I will frame this in terms of controlling a theoretical woman who I love. Not a real and identifiable person who I may know, but a theoretical one. And this could just as easily be applied the other way around, with a woman controlling her man. So you make the adjustments to these ideas as needed. Ready? Here it is. The perfect way to control your relationships, your lover, the one you want to spend eternity with, is simple. Don't try to control her at all. Now let me explain. No one likes to be controlled. Look at marriage in today's world. In the United States, more than half of all marriages end in divorce, and approximately 22% of what's left, 22% of the marriages have partners who go to lawyers to ask if they can afford to get a divorce. That means about 3/4 of today's marriages are miserable and failed. So, what is marriage? Marriage is an attempt to try to control another being, a person. It is a legal contract, and all legal contracts are designed to control the participants in those contracts. And more often than not, they do not work, or work only under conditions of emotional suffering. Again, no one likes to be controlled, so people will always try to free themselves from that control. But the hope of those who enter into a marriage is to find a way to experience long-term happiness. So let's address the issue of long-term happiness. What do you really have control over? Especially when you realize that you do not have control over another person under normal conditions. Now, clearly I am not talking about criminal conditions where people are held captive and forced to do things with a gun pointed at their heads, okay? But under more normal circumstances, you do not have control over another person. But what is it that you actually can control? What you do control are only your own resources. And that can sometimes be in the form of things like money that you have in the bank, your car, an apartment or house, and such things. Now let us say that you know a woman with whom you desire to enter into a romantic relationship. What do? You cannot order her to love you or to spend time with you. She is a free being. She has options. And she is evaluating you. So she looks at you and wonders what kind of a guy you are. This is where money sometimes comes into the picture. You see, there is something called earnest money. And this comes from real estate. If you are interested in purchasing a house, the seller wants to know if you are just spinning their wheels and wasting their time, or if you are someone who is earnest about wanting to purchase the house. So you need to pay the owner what is called earnest money, something you get back if you actually purchase the house. Now, it is totally reasonable for a woman to look at you and ask if you are serious and capable of having a relationship. Now, one way, and certainly not the only way, is for her to discern this if you help her financially, perhaps by helping her with a phone bill or groceries, or perhaps a month's rent during tough times. Now, earnest money tells her you are serious as a contender in the relationship possibilities that are open to her. Now, the earnest money given in a potential relationship does not have to end in a relationship. She could easily accept your earnest money and not have a relationship with you. Remember, you cannot control her. Trying to control a lover by reminding them that you helped the person pay an important bill will only backfire. The potential lover will only feel resentful, and I guarantee you she will likely dump you faster than you can blink. So when you give a potential lover some earnest money, you have to let it go immediately. You cannot expect something in return. It is serving its purpose simply by letting her know that you are earnest. However, after you have established that you are a serious contender in the relationship pool that is open to her, you need only make your interest in her clear. And that may mean being blunt and telling or demonstrating to her how you feel. Words work, so do roses. And then you shut up, stop trying, and wait, however long it takes. And while you wait, the woman may face another financial crisis, and she may hope or even suggest that you help her again. And that is when you must be firm, no matter how severe the financial crisis. No matter how severe the financial crisis. Giving her earnest money was not a contract. It was a gift. As long as she knows that you like her and are able to help her, that is enough. You obviously cannot continue to give your resources away just like that. You should not tell her that you will give her money only if she has a relationship with you, although some people may think that, even if that is not what you intended to convey. And honestly, you cannot control that kind of talk, so try not to be bothered by it when it happens. Continuing to give a person money will never end well. The person must make their own decisions. There is no need to invest your hard-earned resources into a relationship that is destined to fail from the beginning. Again, this dynamic is not confined to any gender or to money. It is a general concept that you let someone know that you are willing to help them in whatever way may be reasonable, but you do not go beyond the earnest gift, whatever it may be, unless there is concrete movement on their part. Okay, now let's connect this general idea to farsight and the desire of the goody teas to help humanity. So first, there is the issue of conveying intent. So translated to the disclosure issue, That means that humanity needs to know that there is a true desire of the good ETs to help humanity. And since this is difficult to convey on a planet that is controlled by a psychological prison by the bad ETs and their human collaborators, the good ETs need some venue where this desire to help is clearly explained. And that is what Farsight is, a direct messaging source of good intent for the good ETs. And FarsightPrime.com is the library of content that humanity needs to make informed decisions. And now there is the issue of earnest money. Translated to the disclosure topic, this is clearly conveyed by the willingness of the good ETs to lose their ships and personnel in the so-called crash retrieval program that has been a major topic of congressional hearings of late, where UFOs or UAPs crash and are retrieved by the U.S. government with their live passenger survivors. What is not being said in the congressional hearings is that the ships are crashing because the U.S. secret space program is using ET technology to shoot the ships down. Technology given to them with the help of the bad ETs in reverse engineering efforts. Now, obviously, the good ETs could defend themselves. But if they did that, it would make the Americans think that the good ETs are the aggressors, and that would throw the Americans even further into the hands of the bad ETs. So the good ETs are making a true and even profound sacrifice to let humanity know that they are serious about trying to help. And then there is the issue of the crisis. Unless humanity experiences a sufficiently serious crisis that would obviously need the help of the good ETs for planetary survival, humanity will not budge. And we now have a world entering the wilderness. So we are now approaching the moment when humanity needs to make a decision. Well, now let's connect this back to the good ETs. On the bad ET side, you have systems that try to preserve control, even if that means limiting change. And on the good ET side, you have a force that requires change before it will intervene. And humanity is in between, caught between control without transformation and transformation without immediate rescue. And that is the wilderness. So now let's step back and look at everything together. You have seen this pattern before. In your own life, you help someone, you step in, you fix the situation, and for a moment everything looks better. But nothing actually changes. The behavior returns, the pattern repeats, and the system continues exactly as it did before. Now scale that up from a person to a family, to a society, to a civilization, and you begin to see the problem. This is not about kindness. This is not about whether helping is good or bad. This is about what actually works. Because if help removes the pressure, and pressure is what creates the change, then help, given at the wrong time, does not help. It locks the system in place. Now think about humanity. We are in a crisis right now on planet Earth. Not one crisis, multiple crises, environmental, political, military, social, and the instinct is the same instinct you've always had. Should someone fix this? And you say to yourself, someone should fix this. But what if fixing it prevents the only thing that can actually save it? What if the crises are not just problems, but pressure points? Pressures that force recognition, adaptation, and transformation. And if that pressure is removed too early, then nothing changes. Now, if you understand the position of the good ETs, you can understand how this all works. It is not that they cannot help. It is not that they do not want to help. It is that helping too soon would guarantee failure, because it would preserve the very behaviors that caused the crisis in the first place. And that leads to the rule, a very simple rule. Here it is. It's a hard rule. A rule that applies at every level to a civilization, to a family, and to even a single person. You do not help until change is already real. Not promised, not discussed, not imagined, but real, observable, irreversible, because that is the only kind of change that matters. And that is the price. That is what people mean when they say nothing in life is free. You don't pay with money. You pay by becoming different. If there is no transformation, there is no real payment. And if there is no real payment, then the help will not help. It will only delay the outcome. And the outcome, delayed long enough, becomes unavoidable. So the real question is not, why don't they help us? The real question is, have we changed enough for help to actually work? And that is not a question that they can answer. That is a question that only we can answer. Friends, that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. Thanks for sticking with me. We had a nice turnout today. And again, I'm a little sorry. I'm sorry that we started a few minutes late, but you hung in there with me, and this is great. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you again next week. Do remember that we have this new mysteries project coming out, the X-37B space plane. That space plane has gone places. It's all secret. Whatever they do is secret. So we went into the space plane to find out what they're doing, and that's going to be coming out in a few days. So that's something to really look forward to. We also have a Conversations with Harvey that will be coming out in a few days. So there should be 2 releases before next Sunday. And all on FarsightPrime.com. Remember to sign up for our free newsletter that you can find on farsight.org, our regular website. That's also where our vault is with the transcripts of everything we do. And do remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on that notifications bell so that you can know when our live streams are happening. All right, everybody. Love you all, and I will be seeing you again in 7 days, and look for the stuff that's coming out in just a few days. All right, this is great. Take care. See you in a week.